My name is Tama Over, and I'm a co-president of the league. I'm going to ask Marianne to come up and introduce our first speaker.
It is my pleasure and privilege to introduce our first speaker today, Gerard Demori. Jerry has had a long and fascinating career in agricultural production, and if you don't have an adventure novel by your bedside, you might just want to read his resume. His work has taken him from Saudi Arabia, Czech Republic, Turkey, Russia, Ukraine, and all across the United States. He knows about production in hydroponics, in greenhouses, and conventional field production. He has been for decades a manager at some of the largest fruit and vegetable producers in this country, and cites as a highlight of his career 6 years as a vice president for Driscoll's. So this is a man who knows what it takes to get produce from sprout to plate. We're so pleased that as now an independent agricultural consultant, Jerry has chosen to live in Royal Oaks with his wife, Kati Demori, a noted painter. And we were very fortunate that we were introduced to Jerry through Mary Ellen Dick. Her name is familiar to you because she is the force behind our pros and cons presentations on ballot propositions. So fortunately, after I had a very challenging time recruiting, and I felt like I had some really great contacts over in the Salinas community, and people are like kind of not returning the emails or like hedging or whatever. So Mary Ellen staged this introduction and said, I have the person who will be willing to speak to you. I think that it is a challenging and sensitive topic, and I'm not surprised, or I don't blame people with a corporate name who were not comfortable coming to speak to us, because it's a very tough issue. How we're going to deal with the time sensitivity of harvesting crops, and the matter of equity to the workers, and the matter of the price for the consumer, and so on and so forth. But Jerry is the man, and let's welcome him and let him tell us what it's about.
Thank you for the introduction, and thank you all for being here today. I guess what you just described is I'm the guy that can't say no. Is that what you? But in reality, I did say no twice. And I would also like to say that anybody that holds a position today in an agricultural business, I would sympathize why they would not want to talk to this subject. So you asked me why. It can be contentious. So my greatest qualification to be up here today is, number one, I want to be, but number two, blowback won't affect me. I plan to be, well, I'll get into that in a minute. So I'm going to make an apology right now, and I know that you never start with an apology, but I'm going to do it. I've got quite a bit of stuff to say. The time is already 10 minutes into that time, and I'm going to read to you, and I'll do it slowly and carefully, but definitions are important, statistics are important, trends are important, and I will not get that done speaking off the top of my head. So permit me, if you will, to read to you. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to begin with the paragraph that I wrote this morning that says, before I begin my presentation, I would like to share with all of you that I feel that the feeding of our people is a matter of national security. You will not find that conviction expressed anywhere in my presentation. It is not necessary for the purposes of this discussion, but it is the perspective of this presenter. The League of Women Voters of Monterey County is a nonpartisan group, quote, encourages citizens to vote and inform themselves about public affairs. My intent is to remain nonpartisan, and my hope is to be informative. In order to consider the question of impact of immigration policy on agricultural communities in Monterey County, it is helpful to understand the history and magnitude of the current state of affairs. Nationally, we have an estimated 2.5 million people employed on U.S. farms at some point during the season. The U.S. Department of Agriculture and the Department of Labor estimates that 42% of those hired farm workers lack authorization. The share of undocumented workers in agriculture has declined slightly in recent years, while the use of the H-2A temporary work visa has increased significantly. There are an estimated 400,000 H-2A visas holders that have been or will be working on farms during calendar 2025 this year. The state. There are an estimated 1/2 million farm workers employed in California at some point during a typical season. It is estimated that about half of the farm workers in California are undocumented. California is the largest user of H-2 visas at 41,000 in 1923. At the county level, a recent estimate of Monterey County suggests a total of 46,000 farm workers. According to the Public Policy Institute of California, approximately 50% are undocumented. During the 10-year period from 2003 to 2013, the county went from 44 H-2A visa holders to a figure of 8,000 of issued visas. For 2024, the estimate is 14,000. Monterey County is either the #1 or #2 user of H-2 visas in the program. That is among counties throughout the entire United States. So your consideration here is certainly warranted. The numbers above are rounded estimates with some extra consideration given for one-year differences in the timing of available information. Please use these numbers to see trends. For instance, the state of California and the county of Monterey appear to be above average in their use of undocumented labor. They also are significant participants in the H-2A program. Monterey's numbers appear to indicate a significant imbalance between documented versus undocumented workers as driven by a significantly higher of the H-2A program, which is about double the national average. This imbalance lowers the percentage of local workers. And if you ask me later, I'll tell you why, but it's a long discussion. Definitions. Definition of the farm worker categories implied here today. Local or domestic labor. They're documented legal immigrants who are part of the local community for mostly a long period of time. They are not transitory. They pay taxes and often hold senior positions on farms. They have acquired expertise that makes them the most valued of the three categories, and they could be as much as 40% of the workforce total. Undocumented workers. They can have all the attributes of local workers, but without legal status. They can also be transitory, following the crops to numerous locations. These workers can also be as much as 42% of the total. This is the one, because I'm going to be pressing H-2A, this is the one I'm going to read slowly. H-2A visa holders. H-2A workers are controlled supplemental labor force. They are used as needed to augment local domestic workforce. The duration of their stay is controlled by constraints of their contract. These contracts have a start and end date. The category is normally in the range of 20 to 25% of the total workforce. The above categories don't make sense without further information, namely that the employer cannot actually or legally make a distinction between the local documented portion of their labor pool and the local undocumented portion. The documented workers have, quote, good documentation that is hard, if not impossible, to identify on the spot as non-authentic. Further, it is illegal for the employer to interrogate a worker regarding the legitimacy of their documentation. I centered much of this presentation on the H-2A program, so a few statistics. Starting with the 1952 Immigration and Nationality Acts, which then were called H-2 visa programs. The effort has been around for nearly 75 years and has lived through 15 administrative terms. In other words, in my own words, there have been a lot of chefs in this kitchen over the years. The H-2A program is rich in statistical information that has helped me understand both the growth and the breadth of our need for immigrant workers to support U.S. agriculture. Also, it is my firm belief that H-2A is a program that is the best road forward to work through our present and future needs. So a few statistics there. In 1979, when records started to be kept, there were 16,000 H-2A workers in the United States. 15,000 were from Mexico. In 2008, there were 64,000 H-2A visa holders, 59,000 from Mexico. 10 years later, in 2018, there were 196,000 H-2A holders, 180,000 from Mexico. In 2020, there were 213,000 H-2A visa holders, with Mexico at 198,000. Today, there are an estimated 400,000 H-2A visa workers working in the agricultural sector, with an estimated 360,000 of them being from Mexico. So that is all to say from 16,000 to 400,000 in 18 years. Mexico, with a large agricultural workforce, a significantly lower wage earning potential, and with outstanding geographic positioning on our southern border, holds a position of about 92% within that program. I would say that we have two givens. We, the United States, have a persistent labor shortage in the agricultural sector. Two, we have a logical documented path to the solution at our southern border. Were anyone in the audience to say that I am not following the script provided for this presentation, namely to discuss recent changes of immigration policy and their impact on Monterey County, I would agree, but I would then offer the following. For the most part, there has been no radical change in the ag business community. Labor has always been short. Regulation and compliance have been difficult for a long time. The plight of our documented legal immigrant workers continues to be uncomfortable, as they are not easily distinguishable from the undocumented co-worker. The number of illegal but well-documented workers has been consistently high for years. The H-2A visa program, while arduous in the devil in the details department, does suggest a path for willing parties that need a solution. So, whose fault or burden is it that traditional local domestic population is aging with fewer workers behind them? Whose fault or burden is it that none among the younger generation has any desire to do the work required? And whose fault or burden is it that farm labor is not only hard work, but frequently highly seasonal? My contention is that much of these issues are social and economic factors that go way beyond the scope of our agenda today. But in any case, these are the realities that we're working with. So I'm going to give a little bit of this to what I'm calling unintended consequences in the enforcement community. And to do that, I'd like to give you an anecdotal. My son and I 2 months ago took a road trip from here to Portland, Oregon to visit a very dear friend of mine who is one of the largest blueberry farmers in America and certainly the largest packer of frozen fruit in America. And we had a lovely 2 days with him, touring his facilities, had a plan at 7 o'clock the next morning to go to visit one of his ranches, 300-acre ranch, about an hour away. While eating breakfast, we received a call from his manager, his farm manager, telling him that ICE had just come to the facility. And he said, whoa, we'll be right there. And said, no. Management said, stay away. We'll take care of it. So, in essence, two Suburbans came on the property, 8 people got out, and they started to fan out into the field. The manager had the wits about him to go say, officer, what are you looking for? What do you want? What is the purpose? And he said, somewhere in this crew, there is a convicted criminal, and we want him. Now wait a minute. It's this is and the guy said, hey, let's come back. Let's figure out who. You tell me who it is. I'll bring him to you. And they said, well, no, we'll go together to get him. No, okay, wait a second. I see all the heads shaking. So anyway, at the end of the day, what the gentleman, the person that they were after, that they did apprehend, was a convicted felon for the exceptional duplication of driver's license and Social Security cards. Okay, so what do we have here? I would contend to you that we have a situation of unintended consequences. I would not say that ICE behaved horribly inappropriately. Tactics, maybe. Refining things, maybe. But at the end of the day, it's the fear factor that did them all in. Because 15 minutes of ICE on their farm, they had 2 weeks of nobody coming back. The entire county had 2 weeks of nobody showing up to work. This is an 8-week harvest period for blueberries. The last period, 20%, was not harvested. And that represented for them a net of a loss of 20% of their revenue for the entire year, because it all comes together in 8 weeks. So my point here is that we don't have to look for a boogeyman anywhere. Anyway, let me back up to my unintended consequences piece. So I just took you through whose burden is it a minute ago. With the reality of unintended consequences throughout the enforcement community, and with competing interests at the federal level, see tariffs and soybean pricing or trade deals and beef value, it is necessary to work towards lowering the temperature at our community level and provide the space and environment to make programs in place work. Give our H2A and H2B programs a good chance to help find solutions to complex, deeply ingrained issues. Like much of life, there may be no quick fix. Securing our borders is necessary for numerous reasons, but will it have an immediate impact? No. As much of the turmoil that is now caused by undocumented immigrants who are already solidly entrenched. So, what I would caution is action, reaction. What I would caution is what's the intent and what's the reality, but look at where the activity is going to fall and what you are actually accomplishing. Stopping illegal immigration is essential. However, it cannot be a standalone measure where all undocumented immigrants to suddenly disappear. The ag industry would be far worse off than it is now. This should be part of a long-range effort to reverse course on a situation that has been recognized for 75 years, 75 years, excuse me. In order to stand before you today, I have conducted 14 interviews with ag business managers, mostly farming entities and value-added processors. For your consideration, permit me to give you some direct quotes from those I have listened to in the past 3 weeks. I also want to give you a thank you, because in that preparation to be here today, I was able to reconnect with 24 people that I haven't talked to for years, and we had a common subject that was interesting to both of us, and that became certainly the most pleasurable, a very pleasurable part of doing this. So these are direct quotes from the people I talked to. Number one, and this one is a universal one, all of them said the same thing. H-2A visa holders have no desire to immigrate. They want to make money and they want to go home. There are millions of illegal immigrants in the United States. Okay, nearly everybody said that. We are successful with H-2A because we work hard at it by traveling to the country of origin to recruit and train people. This was almost everyone. And for me, this was also a learning experience. What was just said is the people that invest in this program benefit from the program. The folks that go down and explain to the people they would like to recruit what they offer, what they need to have done, are going to have those people respond to them and check in with them when they come to this country. And each and every one of them have had H-2A visa workers that are in their 10th, 15th year of coming back. Number 4, H-2A visa holders are the best and most cost-effective workers we have. Everybody said that. There is too much at stake to act hastily. This in reference to DACA and other commitments we have made, several of them. Labor is the single highest expense item in my budget, everyone. There is a general perception that ag workers require no skill. This is simply not true. My far greatest fear at the moment is that we, writ large, will be presented with courses of action that are done hastily or rashly. Any action that is taken hastily or forcefully could unravel what progress we have made and most likely provide no solutions at all. So that's what I want to say, but I'd like to leave you with another anecdotal that doesn't require me to read, it is a sort of a plea for open-mindedness and creativity, and that is the program that the country of Australia set up about 20 years ago with the country of Poland. Australia desperately needed workers. The Poles at that time in their history were about the poorest in the region. They went government to government. In other words, the state to state and negotiated a deal where the Poles would make their own documents for this program and petition it to Australia. The workers would go and stay in the confines of a contract. 80% of their salary would be mailed back to Poland on a regular basis. 20% of the salary was given to them on the spot, and the Australians gave them, at the end of their stay, a 3-month visa to tour the country. Now, how nice is that? Why can't that's the type of thing. But anyway, it's been a pleasure to stand before you. I started by saying that I think that what we're talking about is truly a matter of national security. There's a saying, I think it's biblical, where there's great abundance, there's great expectation. We have abundance. We should be able to do it. And not to be able to do it for whatever reason, I think, is putting us in serious jeopardy. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. Okay, I will take 2 questions, and then I'd like to say that after Dr. Guss gives her presentation, we will have a combined session of Q&A. So we'll take 2 now, and then hopefully we'll have.
I think it's ironic that most farmers are registered Republicans. And now ICE has come in, and I think a lot of people who voted for President Trump are feeling his actions. And I'd just like you to comment on that.
Well, my speech is over, the one where I promised to be nonpartisan. I've been a Democrat my entire life. I've enjoyed most of that. I live that, what you just said, I live every day. I spent 10 years now engaged with the farming community on what are you thinking? And they'll tell me what they're thinking. And then before, and now, within the last couple of months, is the payback. So this worm is turning in my mind. And you know, what is there to say to it? It's reality. They drank the Kool-Aid. I don't know, but I see a turn here of coming to a. Boy, it put me on the spot. I'll tell you what I miss. I miss decency. I miss diplomacy. I miss discussion, and that's what I think will come back to us. And if not, then shame on us. Okay.
Could you please give us more details about the H-2A program? Is it limited in how many people can get the visa? How do they get it? And what's limiting us from using this as the main method of getting workers?
Okay. It's not an easy question, but where we're going to take you is to what I said in the presentation. This is a highly regulated program. It is designed to fill the gaps between what is already available in this country and what isn't available. That has come to the point of it being about 20-25% of the farm workers on the H-2A visa. The growth of the H-2A visa has impacted one group profoundly, except for Monterey County, and that's a whole different discussion. It has affected the undocumented workers. That portion is sinking, the H-2As are going up. I don't think there is a cap on this program. And I think, and that's part of my plea, is let's do this in measured steps. Let's not get rid of all the undocumented. Matter of fact, I don't think the will is even there anywhere to do that. But let economics take their time and their toll, and we'll take the illegals down. Look, it took us 75 years to get in this hole. Let's have 10 years to get out of it and find a program where, over a period of time, we can let the economics and the wisdom of the system, rather than force, give us the results we need.
Yes, but specifically, how could we implement this in a far larger way? What's limiting many more agricultural corporations from using it?
I think I gave you the answer. There is a balance here of what we have available, 3 different distinct classes or categories of workers, one designed specifically to be a buffer, an auxiliary, if you will, and with the full intent of bringing down the undocumented situation over time. So I don't think that anybody said, well, you can't go over 500,000. We already got 400,000. I don't think there is that kind of cap. I may be wrong. But I think there is a full intent to allow this to work at its own pace.
Thank you very much.
Oh, not at all. Thank you.
I'd like to invite Sharon to come up, Sharon Miller, and introduce our next speaker.
I'm pleased to introduce our second speaker today. Dr. Deneen Guss began her first of 2 terms as Monterey County Superintendent of Schools in January 2019. So she had to navigate the pandemic and changes in federal policy. Not easy. She began her career in education teaching 1st grade in South Central Los Angeles as a bilingual teacher. She's served multiple roles since then, including vice principal, principal, director of curriculum, associate superintendent, district superintendent, deputy county superintendent, college professor, new teacher mentor, and student-teacher supervisor. What hasn't she done? She's always focused on community engagement, equity, and improving educational outcomes for all students. She recently announced that she would retire as of January 2027. So, anyone else want to run for that? After some 40 years in education. I know that we're all eager to hear her comments on current immigration policy and our many immigrant students. Welcome, Dr. Guss.
Wow, well, thank you for that beautiful introduction. I think we can summarize that introduction by, I'm getting old. So, as Sharon so eloquently stated, yes, I have been in education for 38 years now and have served in many different roles. And I'm just so thrilled to be here with you today. So first of all, thank you so much for the invitation to speak on this very, very important topic. It has been a wild ride since January. So let me first set the context as to who we serve in our county, because then that will help us get to the conversation at hand. So if you can go to the next slide. I first want to just start off with sharing that in our county, we serve 72,224 students. This chart kind of shares with you district by district and how many students we serve. You can see that the red districts are our small rural districts, our blue districts are our basic aid districts, and all of the other districts are neither small rural or basic aid served districts. This is going to be important because I'm building the stage for who we serve. So if you can go to the next slide, please. Enrollment by ethnicity. 82.9% of the students in our K-12 system are Hispanic or Latino. 10.1% of our students are white, 2.1%, two or more races, 1.5% Asian, 1.3% Filipino, 1% African American, 0.6% we do not know because it was not reported, 0.3% Pacific Islander, and 0.3% American Indian Alaska Native. So these are the students that we serve. I do want to point out before I go on to the next slide, just because a student is Hispanic does not mean that they are an immigrant, and it does not mean that they are a migrant student. We're going to talk a little bit more about that distinction. Next slide. Here you see a chart that gives the demographic data by subgroup. This is key because if you look at the chart, what you will see is that 32.4% of our students are English learners and 6% of our students are migrant students. And I'm going to explain a little bit more about the difference between migrant and immigrant. Next slide. So, our immigrant population. We have about 170,000 students in our county. That's 39% of our population that are foreign-born residents. This includes settled immigrants and some migrants who have resided long-term. And this data is according to the U.S. Census 2023 American Community Survey data. We also have migrant students, and our migrant population in our K-12 system ranges between 10,000 and 15,000 students. It fluctuates because you have to be eligible to participate in the migrant program, and that changes from year to year because of the eligibility criteria. And I do want to point out that our migrant population are students who are individuals or families who move from place to place, usually temporarily or seasonally for work or economic reasons. And let me just take a moment here to give you a little bit more details about the migrant program. So the migrant program, which is a program that's always had bipartisan support for years and years, it serves children ages 3 to 21. Students who are eligible are students who have had a qualifying move across a school or district lines within the past 3 years. The moves occurred because the parent or guardian or youth engaged in the migratory work are those who are involved in either agriculture, dairy, lumber, fishing, or other seasonal temporary work. And in our county, for the most part, these are our children of our farm workers. I also want to point out that students are eligible for 3 years following a qualifying move. So if the family moved to follow a crop, maybe from here to Ventura County or Kern County or even out of state, because we do have migratory patterns that the students tend to follow or their families tend to follow, they remain eligible for 3 years after the move that made them eligible. The eligibility can be renewed if another qualifying move occurs. Students may qualify for services beyond 3 years as long as that new qualifying move continues. And services continue through the end of the school year, even if the eligibility ends mid-year. And what that means is if a family moves mid-year and the eligibility is now going to change, or I should say, there wasn't a qualifying move, so they're no longer eligible for the program, they still get to remain in the program until the end of that school year, which makes sense, because that way we have fewer disruptions. And I want to point out that California public schools do not ask about immigration or legal status during enrollment. It is required by state law. Education Code 234.7 ensures that we do not collect that information. I also want to point out that there is federal legislation. You'll go to the next slide. And that legislation is Plyer versus Doe. So back in 1982, there was a landmark U.S. Supreme Court decision, 5-4 ruling, that challenged Texas law that denied free public education to undocumented children. The ruling is as follows. The court held that the law violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. It declared that undocumented children are persons under the Constitution. Education is recognized as a vital public benefit that cannot be denied based on immigration status. So therefore, schools do not collect that information from children upon enrollment. I do want to say a side note, though. In order to establish age requirements, typically families will turn in a birth certificate so that we can determine their actual age. So we do know that, right, we do know, especially like in our Head Start program, that about 95% of our students actually were born here in the U.S., even though we are not collecting immigration information. So, next slide. How are all of the immigration policy changes impacting education? Well, I can tell you there have been major impacts. I do not think that my team and I have had a good night's sleep since January because of all the major changes that have been coming our way. The first change started in January when Trump's directive for ICE ended the protections for schools, hospitals, and churches. So prior to that, the Biden era from 2011 to 2013, guidance limited ICE arrests in sensitive locations. So those were schools, churches, hospitals. That changed, and now ICE can enforce deportations anywhere without prior approval. And of course, it targets our undocumented immigrants. So when this change occurred, there was major public backlash. There was a ton of community advocacy that went underway right away. Next slide. Just an example of what some of the public backlash looked like. There were protests. There were various events where the immigrant community decided, hey, America needs to know how important our services are. You just heard from Jerry how important their work is to the ag community, but also to other workforce areas as well. Hospitality, I mean, I could go on and on. And so there was a movement. It was February 3rd, 2025, called the Day Without Immigrants. This movement aimed to demonstrate the economic and social impact of immigrants by encouraging immigrants to pause work, school, shopping, and community activities. Now, I want to share with you a little bit about the impact of the Day of the Immigrants on schools. Schools experienced mass absences by both students and staff, highlighting how immigration-related fear directly affects education. Because of this major impact on the Day of the Immigrant, there was lost learning time by all the students who missed school that day. There was a loss in state attendance funding because, as you all know, schools are funded by their ADA, which means the average daily attendance. So if you have a day where you have thousands and thousands of students miss school, that's a humongous hit on school districts' budgets. The other interesting thing, and now you're going to see this on the next slide, is that staff members in schools also stood up and showed their support for the immigrant community. So it wasn't just a hit to the ADA for schools, it was also a very, very challenging day, a difficult day to have coverage for the students that were at school when we had so many staff members out. This beautiful chart shows you the percent of students that were out that day and the percent of staff. Now, I do want to point out that there were a few districts in our county that had a non-student school day. Just by chance, they had a planned professional development. So you see in the chart where it says non-school day, that's because those schools were having a PD day for teachers. You also see, let's see, there's another one, Big Sur Charter. That is a program that's actually hybrid and remote, so it's not a program where students come to school each and every day. So they're impacted a little bit differently as well. But what I want to point out to you here on this slide, if you go back to the other slides that talk about the enrollment numbers for each of the schools, when you look at the percentages of students who miss school that day, it is tremendous. And we didn't list the numbers of students on this chart simply because if I said to you, let me give an example, San Ardo, they have about 85 students who attend that district. If I would have said to you, 45 kids were out that day, but I'm not telling you the percent that creates, then 45 students doesn't seem like very much. But when 45 students out of 65 are out, that's a lot. So just to illustrate this point, I highlighted Salinas Union High School District. So that is a very large district. They serve, I want to say over 11,000 students. You can see here that 35% of their students out, that was 5,257 students who missed school that day. That's tremendous. That is a huge hit on the district's budget because, of course, that reduces their ADA. And, of course, the lost learning time for over 5,000 students. That is huge. And then also notice, again, the staff column about what percent of the staff members were also out in support of their immigrant students. And you can see that's pretty tremendous. You see at the bottom, just to illustrate the fact for just the Monterey County Office of Education alone, you see at the bottom of the slide, 86 staff members were absent. And that's 25 to 45% of the student absences depending on the school as well. We run our programs on various other school campuses as well as our own schools, and so we're kind of out there and everywhere. To have 85 of my staff members miss work that day, you can imagine the scramble. We already have a shortage for substitute teachers, so trying to find enough subs to cover all of those classes, that was a huge lift. The other thing that I should mention is that The vast majority of the students that we are serving in our program are students who are on IEPs. So these are moderate to severe special education students, and you cannot just call in a sub for these severely needed, or students who have severe needs, and expect that they can just come in and pick up and there's a lesson plan for them. So the impact of the Day of the Immigrant was so huge that literally legislation was introduced this year. Unfortunately, it was not signed by the governor, but that legislation that was introduced would have allowed the J13 waiver process. And so if you're wondering, what in the world is that? What that is if there is a major emergency or a crisis that makes you close your school, then those school districts can apply for a waiver where they don't lose the ADA for that particular school day. So the legislation that was introduced was to try to change that J13 waiver process to include days like this, because again, the huge hit of a decrease in ADA, that's a major catastrophe for schools. Unfortunately, that legislation was not signed. But this just gives you the picture of how many students, how many families, how many friends, neighbors, and supporters there are of our immigrant community. So very, very interesting and a huge impact. Now, let's go into more impact. So many pieces of legislation as it relates to schools were introduced during this legislative session. What you can see here before you are just some of the legislation that changed in response to the immigration policy shifts. The first one, California State Haven Schools, AB 49, that now prohibits local education agencies from allowing immigration enforcement officers to enter public school areas without a valid judicial warrant, court order, or subpoena. Now, schools already followed that practice even prior to this legislation, because obviously you can't just let anyone walk onto your school campus and try to take a child or obtain their records. And I also do want to mention that, as I stated before, we do not collect immigration status information from our students. And so if ICE shows up on a campus, they are required to produce that court warrant, judicial warrant, a court order, or a subpoena. The challenge, though, is school personnel that tend to receive the visitors that come onto our campuses is usually, like, who's on the front line? It's the school secretary. And then if there is a challenge or a question, then the school secretary calls the principal. Friends, I'm here to tell you today, when educators are prepared to become an educator, we are not trained in immigration policy. We are not trained on how to read a judicial warrant or a subpoena or any of those things. When those things come up, we tend to have to reach out to legal counsel to ensure that we're following the process correctly. But because now we know that schools are no longer safe havens, we are now required by law to train all of those individuals that would be handling an ICE enforcement immigration officer who shows up on our campuses. So not only has it changed the law, but it has also now required us to train all of our team members who would be receiving those ICE enforcement officers on our campus. So again, nothing that we were trained for when we became educators, but now we are training all of our team members. The next piece of legislation I wanted to speak to is the SAFE Act, which is SB 98. That requires school districts to notify families and staff immediately if federal immigration enforcement agents are on campus. And it also now requires that the comprehensive safe school plans that districts always enact each year and train their staff on now has language about how to respond to ICE enforcement should they come on school campuses. The other thing that this has now created is schools having to be very well aware of how critical it is to get that information out to both the staff members, to the students and their families, and that required communication has to happen as soon as possible. The law doesn't define if that's, by the end of the school day or if it's within 12 hours or 24 hours. It just says as soon as possible. So what this has now created is here in Monterey County, and I'm sure this is happening in other counties as well, we've created a common communication tool that all districts in the county will use if ICE enforcement does show up on the campus, so that we're using common messaging as we inform all the parties that we now need to inform. I do want to take a moment to state that here in Monterey County, we have not had any ICE enforcement officers show up on our school campuses, so it hasn't taken place here. But this has happened in other places in the state. It has happened in Los Angeles, where ICE enforcement officers showed up at graduation ceremonies, showed up at school offices asking to speak to children or get copies of their records. It has happened in, several other counties throughout the state, but thus far not here. And that's why all of these measures are going into place. So even though it's not happened here to this point, it has happened in other places. The next piece of legislation is the caregiver authorization expansion, which is AB 495. So now, obviously, schools are very concerned about the end of the school day coming and a parent or guardian not showing up to pick up their child because they may have been detained or deported. And typically what happens in those cases when a parent is not able to pick up their child, we all have emergency cards, and it lists other individuals who legally have the right to pick up their child. Well, now we've had to do twofold. We've had to really remind parents how important it is that that emergency card is updated, the information is correct, and to also encourage and then support families who need help with this to create what we call a child care safety plan. That plan delineates who can pick up their child. It also now, because of this legislation, expands who you can include on that child care safety plan. And schools and community agencies, nonprofit agencies across the county, and some of our amazing partners in the legal world have been helping us to educate parents about the importance of having a child care safety plan in place. Because then that allows us to know who we can release the child to, and it does also allow those individuals to make very important legal decisions for their child in the absence of a parent who may have been detained or deported. We also had AB 419 recently be signed by the governor as well, and that's protecting immigrant families' educational rights. And so this now requires schools to prominently display the Know Your Educational Rights Guide, detailing the protections that are there for our immigrant families, and that all students have a right to a free public education. So again, and I go back to that free public education, remember that goes back to the Plyer versus Doe decision and California Education Code that says we do not discriminate. All children, all youth are welcome in our schools. Okay, now I'm going to deviate just a little bit. Well, wait, before I do, I did also bring you a document. It's not in the slide today, but we will be sharing these with you. This is a little packet of all of the immigration-related laws that have recently changed here in California in response to the federal immigration policy shifts. And so we'll give you a copy of this. I'm not able to speak to each and every one of these today, but there are some very important other policies that I do want to point out to you that are included here. Just a couple. Really, really quickly. And did I bring my glasses up here with me? Yes, I did. This one's, I think, of interest as well, and that is SB 313, called Vital Records and Birth Certificates. So this particular legislation, again, while it is not directly for schools, but it is in response to immigration policy changes, it modifies California's birth certificate requirements to include the birthplace of each parent in the confidential medical and social portion of the certificate of live birth beginning on July 1st, 2027, while ensuring that this information remains confidential and unavailable to the public. So a major shift there and how it impacts schools is, as you know, we tend to collect birth certificates to prove the age of the child. We do not use those for immigration status, but just simply to prove what age the child is. There are several other pieces of legislation that tangentially concern schools, but are not directly for schools. And so that's why I thought it might be helpful for you to take this packet home and take a look at it a little bit later. Now, I also want to, I'm going to deviate just a little bit here. And the reason I want to deviate from the impact of immigration policies to talk just a little bit about the impounded federal funds is because it's tangentially related. Each year, the federal funds that are allocated to school districts, they are allocated through an act of Congress and the approval of the budget process. And typically, those programs, and some of them are what we call forward-funded programs, meaning we already know what our allocation is going to be because of the eligibility of specific students the prior year. So, for example, the migrant program is one that is a forward-funded program, which means even if it has not yet been approved in the current federal budget, it was approved last year, and then the funds are supposed to be received at the state level and then distributed to the counties, and then we distribute to the districts. That funding by the end of June, because that money already starts to be spent July 1st. Summer programs, all of those enrichment activities and events that occur during the summer, that all starts July 1st. And so that's why this is critical information. The other piece that's important to know is that school districts have to make staffing decisions, and they have to notify anyone who's going to be laid off or not be able to remain employed with the district due to lack of funding or other reasons. Those notices have to be made by March 15th. So if you have employees that are federally funded, you have to know that you're not going to receive that funding prior to March 15th so that you can make the appropriate layoff notices. This money this year was impounded, and you see on the slide, I'm not going to read it to you, but these are all the programs that were impounded, and I specifically want to highlight the migrant education program, because the migrant education program, it does serve many of our immigrant students. And remember, you do not have to be an immigrant to be eligible for the migrant program, but for the most part, many of our migrant program participants are also immigrants. That's a $14 million program in our county, and that funding was impounded. And so after great advocacy and some lawsuits from about, 24 different states, the money was eventually released. The program was saved for this year, but that program is now on it's being proposed to be cut in this fiscal year's budget. So that will have a major impact in our county in two ways. One, the students will not be able to participate and receive these services, and two, the employees that provide those services will lose their job if that program goes away. Okay, next slide. Again, I kind of mentioned this already. Our county, we serve about 10,000 migrant students, and hence the program is funded about $14 million. We have the largest migrant program in the entire state of California right here in Monterey County. Okay, next slide. Head Start. This is the other piece that it's also related to the immigration policy in that many of the participants in our Head Start program are also immigrants. And the changes that have occurred in the Head Start program since the change in administration and the change in immigration policy, it reduced the Head Start regional offices from 10 to 5 overnight without any notice to all of us grant recipients. So that was a major shift that caused major disruption for schools and nonprofit organizations that also run these programs. The other thing that happened is, because as you know, the current administration is trying to address the immigration concerns that they have in multiple ways. One way is to change the Head Start program, this is what was introduced, to go from a bipartisan supported program for many, many years to a program that would now count as a public benefit. So we were all notified that that policy change was going into effect immediately, but then there was also a public comment period while public comments were received. Fortunately, that was overturned, so the policy changed back to now making it not a public benefit. For those of you who do not understand the public benefit piece, if you want a path to citizenship, you have to prove that you have not been receiving public benefits. So that's how it's all connected. And as you know, that would have been a major issue for us educators because of Plyer versus Doe and our own education code that does not allow schools to collect information about immigration status. So how would we have even done that? We do not know. The other big policy change, and I'm going to go really quickly here, is that the new policy, or I should say, there's a new interpretation of a policy, and that is regarding carryover funds for Head Start. So you may have seen on the news recently, in Santa Cruz, there's a Head Start program that is really struggling right now. They were going to close the program. Various entities chipped in, tried to keep the program open. A school district, the Pajaro School District, is trying to temporarily take that program over because, as you know, childcare is a major challenge in our counties, and we need childcare. If we don't have childcare, parents can't go to work. These are how all of these things are related. Well, the change in that carryover interpretation is now that if you did not apply for the carryover funds by April, you no longer can get your carryover funds. That was never how this policy was implemented in California all these years. We don't even get the form that you fill out to ask for the carryover funds until August. So if you don't get the form until August, how can you turn it in April? For the Monterey County Office of Education, it's $2 million that we lose if we do not get to keep that carryover. So this is still in debate. We can't debate it right now because of the federal shutdown. And so as soon as they reopen, all these California Head Start programs are going to obviously continue to advocate that we do get our carryover funding. That one is not yet decided. Okay, next slide. We talked a little bit about the visa program. So this is also extremely important for education. We have two different types of visas that our educators tend to obtain. The J1 cultural visa is a teacher exchange program. Participants in that program get to stay here for 3 years, and then after 3 years, if they still have an employment contract offer, they can extend that to 5 years. But that visa program is meant to be a short-term cultural exchange. It's typically used for us to recruit SPED, ESL, and STEM teachers when we have shortages. And let me just share with you, friends, we have had major shortages in special education teachers for many, many years. This is not a new problem. And so what that means for us is while we're trying to grow our own and increase the number of special education teachers in our nation and specifically in the state of California, the numbers of special education students is increasing faster than we can grow the teacher workforce for this particular content area. So if we lose our J1 cultural visa teachers, we will be in a world of hurt. I noted here on the slide that MCOE has 18 teachers utilizing J1 visas right now. So far, there's no proposed changes to that program, but I can tell you that getting the visas approved has been delayed. It's taken quite a long time, and so some of our teachers are not able, even though we start this process in the prior spring, they physically can't always get here until well after the school year has started. The next visa program this one's also a big one. So H-1B visas, those are work visas. Under that visa, and a person can stay up to 6 years, and there is a path forward with a green card. So this is meant for long-term hires and retaining talent. Currently, just at MCOE alone, we have 8 MCOE teachers utilizing the H-1B visas. Now here's the challenge for us. It has been announced, you've heard it on the news, I'm sure, that there is a proposal to make H-1B specialty visas have a $100,000 price tag. We do not yet know if that is going to impact our educators who are on an H-1B visa, or if it's only going to be for other specified fields and not include education. We're hopeful that it will not include educators, because if that's the case, my friends, we will not be able to maintain H-1B specialty visas. It's just unaffordable for education. Okay, next slide. So, what have we been doing to support our immigrant community? Many things. We have held Know Your Rights meetings for parents, all of the community partners, immigration lawyers, everyone who can help put these sessions on have been doing so. We have distributed red cards to our immigrant families so that they will know their rights. We have provided tons of resources, legal aids, counseling. We literally have a whole website on the Monterey County Office of Education's website dedicated to resources for our immigrant families. The County of Monterey also has a ton of resources available for our immigrant families. I mentioned earlier, we've been doing staff training to respond to ICE enforcement at schools, just in case that might happen here in our county. And even if it doesn't happen, it is now, as you saw when I pointed out the earlier legislation, required for us to do so. And we have also supported our families with creating those child care safety plans, which are now so very critical. So I'll wrap my comments up by just talking a little bit about the challenges in advocacy. Immigration enforcement and policy shifts have really increased fear in schools. It has reduced attendance. It has created great anxiety for our students. And it's very difficult for children to learn when they don't know if there's going to be a parent picking them up at the end of the school day, or if they're having to be concerned about those situations. I also want to point out that we have many families where it's a mixed status. So maybe the mother is a legal immigrant and the father is not, or vice versa. And so it just, again, creates a lot of concern for our students. There's the potential elimination of our migrant education program. And the migrant education program, as I mentioned earlier, it provides all of those supports to the farm workers' children who have to move frequently to follow the crops. And so without that extra support, like summer school, intercessions, enrichment activities, college and career guidance, those students stand to struggle a great deal. I talked a little bit about those proposed Head Start restrictions. If that undermines our access to our early care and education programs, we're going to have fewer students who are starting school prepared and ready to learn, so that's of great concern. And then I didn't mention on any of the other slides, but I do want to bring up the fact that the cuts to the SNAP program and other benefits that increase food insecurity, That also does harm the learning outcomes, because when our children are not receiving nutritious meals at home, they have to rely completely on the meals that they get at school. And if any of you have been at a school campus and you've eaten a school lunch, while I want to say they're absolutely enormous meals and delicious, that's not always the fact. They meet the nutritional guidelines that we are required to meet, but remember, those school lunches, it's a reimbursement program, and so then the reimbursement for those meals is very minimal. So we do the very best we can to provide a nutritional meal, but I'm telling you, if you talk to young people on campuses, they will tell you it's still probably not enough. So with the SNAP reductions, we are expecting much, much more, or I should say many more of our students experiencing food insecurity. And then, of course, the need for sustained funding and inclusive education policies that protect every child. I will wrap up my presentation by saying my seat is a nonpartisan seat. And so, and of course, you know, we have had the great honor and pleasure all of these years to have bipartisan support for many of these federal programs. Those things are now coming into question, and so it is creating many, many challenges for educators. And for any of you who in the room, if you know an educator or you were an educator, I'm sure you would agree that it is not a comfortable position to put educators in the role of dealing with ICE enforcement on campuses or immigration related policies. It is very, very challenging. So those are the current impacts here in Monterey County and across the state. And I just have to commend Jerry for all of his comments earlier. You set the perfect stage about why our particular county is so unique and is so very different. And whether or not you are in support of immigrants or not in support of immigrants, I can tell you that I have received so many emails from family members, friends, the general community, just letting me know that they are very concerned about their own child, not immigrant children, but their own child being at school and possibly witnessing one of their friends, classmates, being detained or taken off a school campus. And so it is really creating a lot of concern in the education community, and I'm open to any questions that you may have. So, sorry, that wasn't the best news I had to deliver, but it is what's happening. That's the impact on immigration policy for us at this time.
If our speakers are available, we could take a few questions here for perhaps the next 10 minutes.
You're bringing up the anxiety that's being experienced. This is why we're having such mental cases. I mean, we need to have nurses or physicians or anyone in the medical field to deal with mental issues. Are you seeing that?
Yes, we are. Our school counselors are overwhelmed with trying to provide the support to our young people and to their families who are very, very concerned and great anxiety, great depression with all the uncertainties for sure. We also are experiencing that mental health crisis right now because we're coming out of COVID still. The shutdown was way too long, and when our young people were not on our school campuses without that day-to-day interaction, that too increased the level of anxiety and depression that we're seeing today. So I really do think it's a combination.
If you're on the board, how would you position yourself to deal with the possibility of ICE coming on the property?
One, it also takes me a little bit out of my expertise, which has been now statistical and trying to understand the trends.
My question is about the agricultural community. Are the companies that do go to Mexico, for example, and recruit for the H-2A visas, I take it that those are, first of all, there would be tax incentives for the companies to do that, right? If not, there certainly should be. I should think there would be. That's the first question. And the second is, when people come in under those visas, are they then eligible for health care and so forth while they're living here? Thank you.
The people that make the effort to go down and meet ahead of time and explain who they are ahead of time probably have no more of a financial uptick than expenses of doing it, but have determined that the results are well worth it. I'm not going to, I can't get into that. I just don't, I'm not qualified to go into your second question, really.
Through Bravery Angels, our group I'm a leader in, is we've been working on immigration and had people do presentations, actually online, that we followed. One of them was that for the H-2A, the people, the farm owners were required to provide housing. And there was this comment that, well, what are small farmers going to do? There's tons of small farmers. Do you have any ideas how they could deal with this challenge?
Well, let me give you a statistic first. In the state of Oregon, the average rate of erecting housing under the H-2A program for 96 workers is $1.3 million total for 96. It's an expensive endeavor. It's part of the program. It's calculated, and that when you hear some of the wage numbers that go up into the 24, 25, 26, it incorporates an assigned value to that. What the second part of your question?
What about small farmers?
Small farmers can do it any way they, anybody can do it any way they want. We've got a gentleman in North Carolina that there was a defunct Motel 6, and he just rented it for the season and did it. As long as you have housing that meets certain requirements, and they're not minimal requirements, you can offer it without having to build it on site. It doesn't have to be on the site. As a matter of fact, frequently it is not on site.
Thank you so much to both our speakers and your interest, those of you who remain. We will end the program now. And last round of applause for our great program today. Thank you.